なんでしょう、お化けかなんかじゃないですか?
Now, that's just kind of Gonzalo going at it as they usually do. Interpret that as you will. This one opened with Momoko and Kaoru making their way to Miyako's home, which, in spite of Japan's confusing as all hell address system, wasn't hard to miss. Little did they know that was just the dog's house. If you can figure out where that reference comes from, then congratulations, you're all just like me. Welcome to the 30 and up club. But yeah, since it was a very traditional old Japanese house built with a ton of dust collecting lumber, she wanted her friends to help clean it up a little. And of course, being the proper little lady of this team, Miyako did seem to have the skills to be a good cleaner, and probably could have done it on her own, if it weren't for the fact that she didn't have any time management skills. Well, on the bright side, I think Two-Face would love to hire you. She certainly wasn't going to get any help from her grandmother, who was in no condition to do so, and likely Miyako wanted to clean things for the old lady's health. And really, the last thing any of us need is for this old lady to croak and then become one of the most ineffective narrators ever. Do your job, lady! Thus, Momoko and Kaoru tried to work together to clean, leading to predictable results between a Blossom and Buttercup pairing. During all this, Granny also warned them to be delicate, as the house also had feelings, which I'm sure isn't going to be foreshadowing anything disturbing later. But yeah, of course these two didn't heed the old lady's words, and just transformed to speed clean the house, which is a little hypocritical on Kaoru's part, since she did forbid Momoko from cleaning their classroom as a superheroine a couple of episodes ago. Granted, that was more to maintain their secret identities, but still, the old lady was in the house. Anyway, they didn't even work all that efficiently, as they ended up missing a room. They would later learn about this inner room from Miyako and her grandmother, and how it was an important room to the previous tenants of this house, Miyako's ancestors. And yet, in spite of hearing all of these stories, our heroines lied through their teeth and said they took care of it. Yeah, this is one of those ghost stories where our protagonists lie and or cheat their way through something, and thus receive some very nice karmic justice later. And while some stories can go a little too far and make the karma receiving characters too unlikable, this is just bad enough for these two, and it does fit their characters. Sure, lying about honoring the memory of Miyako's ancestors is terrible, but they don't understand the weight of it, and they are about to get their just desserts anyway. Still better than any of the effects in Sadako 3D. Truck-kun really phones it in when it comes to live action. But yeah, possibly as a symptom of their negligence, Kaoru and Momoko started to hear and see everything as being a part of the paranormal. Now, you could say this is another classic ghost story plot point, where the guilt builds within the characters, and they start to see and hear things that may or may not even be there. In this case, there was something supernatural present, but most of this was more likely coming from a Telltale Heart-esque effect. By the way, what's y'all's favorite interpretation of that story? Me personally, it's Tiny Toons.
Hear it? Louder it grew. Louder and louder until it went loudly loud!
I miss the 90s when you never needed context for stuff like that. Unable to sleep because of one particularly ominous sound, the girls tried to explore where it was coming from. This led them to the kitchen, and something admittedly kind of terrifying.
That's disturbing.
However, this was far from the end of their long night.
The wind! It's the wind!
I have to admit, this bit of Miyako initially trying to justify the strange occurrences practically, but then offhandedly admitting that things were a little supernatural, was my favorite part of this whole episode. One interpretation you could take from this is that she's purposely trolling her teammates because she knows they lied about the inner room. Probably not the case, but I just do like the idea of Miyako adding to their fears. Ultimately, she ended up going to try and scope out where the noise was coming from, and when she didn't return, they tried to look for her. Y'all really gotta try some Granny's special stash. Seriously, they're sleepy, and then there's this. Anyway, the noise turned out to be coming from a cleaning tool that was forcing the door to open and close, so Miyako took care of it.
Here! It is the whirring of your hideous vacuum!
Seriously, look up Night Ghoulery. It's one of the best Halloween specials ever. But yeah, there was actually nothing to be scared of. You know, aside from that one door that was actually opening and closing on its own.
Oh, okay. What?
They tried to hide in Granny's room, which frankly sounds scarier than dealing with the actual ghost, but the old lady was gone. Of course, they figured the ghost had gotten her, even though old people often turn out to be the real culprits in these sorts of scenarios, but still, they tried to find another place to hide. Well, this video's getting demonetized. Still, for whatever reason, they stuck around long enough to learn that apparently this wasn't the first time Granny had gotten a visit from the paranormal. Oh crap, this old lady is part of some weird-ass cult that worships a ghost that only appears on cheap-ass cameras and Xbox Connects, isn't she? And speaking of those movies, I guess it was time for that one scene from part 3 that legit terrified me in the cinema. Fortunately, this whole scene was nowhere near as terrifying, and in fact, the whole episode has been kind of hilarious with everyone's reactions to the paranormal. Thus, even though this is kind of meant to be a horror comedy, I don't think anything here is actually going to scare. Wait, what's going on there? Yeah, okay, maybe it's a bit more of a personal phobia, but if you put teeth on any inanimate object, you're guaranteed to get some sort of reaction out of me at least. I don't know, maybe it's just like some lingering trauma from Monster House, because pretty much everything in that film scared me. And don't show any images! Anyway, the girls transformed, and on a little side note, I gotta say, I do appreciate how the show has a bunch of different variations on these transformations, depending on what the girls are wearing in their civilian forms. Granted, they probably did use some sort of template to streamline the process, but still, good on them for animating new assets like Kaoru's sleeping cap coming off here. Anyway, believing that it was just another typical monster, the girls tried to defeat it with 2 sets of attacks. However, all of this was seemingly being blocked by clean tools, which might have been the house's way of saying what it really wanted. Yep, it was clearly coughing up dust, and I guess the interim was like its throat, thus finally taking Granny's words to heart. Momoko wised up and led the charge to clean the room. Hooray! We didn't even have to bust out the excavator or the dynamite. With that, the episode ended with the girls cleaning the inner room of both its dust as well as subtly some him particles by the looks of it. However, cleaning the room ended up taking all night, leaving them kind of like me every Sunday morning. If you're a fan of horror, and especially J-horror, then this episode would definitely be up your alley, like it was for me. In general, I think haunted house stories are really interesting, as they tend to send both the characters and the audience to unfamiliar locations where just about anything could happen. That was certainly the case here, and while it wasn't all that scary, unless you have the same phobias as me, it was still a very fun send-up to the genre. Add in some surprisingly subtle little bits of storytelling for a show like this, and you get a really fun episode about restoring houses before they start flipping you. Both this and the Napolitan story from the last episode were written by Kento Shimoyama, who, in spite of his other work for Toei being problematic to say the least, he was actually a very solid writer for the series, often knowing how to place emphasis on the emotions of the characters as they go through some bizarre scenarios and learn some important lessons along the way. In this case, the story was all about Momoko and Kaoru learning about the importance of hard work and respecting other people's property. While seemingly having been infected with the him particles, the house only really became hostile when our heroines neglected their commitments and received karmic justice in the form of both the house and likely their own guilt eating away at them. This of course led to some of the best laughs, especially when juxtaposed against Miyako and her grandmother's nonchalant reactions. Speaking of whom, I really like some of the subtle storytelling they managed to pull off with this old lady. Going by her statement, this wasn't her first encounter with ghosts, so it could be assumed that the house has been infected with him particles previously, like maybe during his initial attack on Edo. From there, it either got reinfected upon his return, or some of it remained in the house many years later through all of the cleanings. Whatever the case, it is a good subtle message about appreciating what has been passed down to us by the previous generations and how it is our responsibility to maintain them as best we can. At one point in the episode, Miyako's grandmother fell asleep, though it almost looked like she had passed away. Obviously she didn't, but maybe that was just another tie-in to this message. Thus, if we were to take away anything from this overall really fun episode, it should be take care of everything close to you. With a bunch of little horror touches, this is the kind of haunted house I wouldn't mind visiting as long as it's not gonna eat me. Work on part 1 of the Yu-Gi-Oh! Opening rankings video is going smoothly, and hopefully we shouldn't run into any major issues with uploading it. Again, if anything, it's just gonna go on the secondary channel, so a few copyright claims shouldn't be a big deal. But yeah, we'll cover what I personally consider to be the least good openings in the franchise. I mean, I actually do think some of the bottom 11 has some great ones, along with some not so good ones. You'll see what I mean when it comes out hopefully later this week. And until then though, farewell for now my friends, and hey, who let the cat in? And oh. Hello, ma'am. Is that your cat? Let's go get him. And, hey, who left the TV on?